You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
Well, I don't know how you're doing, but I'm just tickled because today we've got a passage that is all about military history and strategy, and I think it's going to be a hoot. In the second half, or really the last third of Nehemiah chapter 4, we get some of the details about exactly how Nehemiah arranges his manpower to try to prevent an attack that could come from any number of places. This is a serious problem, and it's going to take some serious strategery to figure out how to thwart the evil designs of Sanballat and the enemies of the rebuilding here in Nehemiah chapter 5. So you remember, yesterday we were reading about how Sanballat and Tobiah and all these other people, they got whipped into a frenzy. They're sneaking in, they're giving threats through secondhand sources, and everybody's hearing rumblings of all of these threats about, we're going to infiltrate your ranks, and when you least expect it, boom, you're just going to get shanked in the ribs. We're going to kill you while you're building your wall. And the laborers, who are mostly just normal people who are rebuilding things, they're starting to lose heart. They've made good progress, but they're getting discouraged because the threat of being killed on 0 seconds notice can cause a person to get a little distracted, get a little discouraged. It's understandable. And there's still a lot of work to do because there's a huge giant pile of rocks. And then Nehemiah comes along and he gives an inspiring speech. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. That's a pretty good speech. I mean, that's the kind of thing that can get people fired up and ready to go. But if you're fired up and you're ready to go, but you have a horrible plan, you're still going to get absolutely annihilated if it comes to pitched physical combat. So what is the actual plan? Nehemiah 4, verse 15. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to do his own work. So apparently, somewhere in here, there was some threat of a full-blown attack, and somehow the diagnosis was the cure. Just Nehemiah and the Jews being aware and getting wind of it and not crumbling but rallying and continuing the work. That was apparently enough to thwart the initial plan of Sanballat for how he wanted to attack. But the threat of a guerrilla attack or some newly designed attack under the cover of darkness still lingers, and Nehemiah is taking that very seriously. Verse 16. From that day on, half my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah. Okay, well, there's one thing that jumps off of the page for me right there that I hadn't caught until right this second, and that is that spears, shields, bows, and armor. He didn't say armor before, did he? Maybe you know. Where is that? Because we had swords and spears and bows for sure. Oh, it's right here, verse 13. Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. No armor. Okay, well, let's think about that. Is it significant that armor is added to the list? You know what? I think it is significant. Armor is super heavy. And what would this armor have been like? Okay, probably one of two things. The Persians, during the generation of Darius and Xerxes, their elite units tended to use almost what looks like a wicker armor, like from Pier 1 Imports, if you remember that store. Literally woven, heavy stick work that they would create armor plates out of. It would almost look like a hybrid of a Western armor, but almost like a samurai armor, something you'd picture being an Eastern armor as well. And you wouldn't think that would work, but one time in college, I had this great professor who was always doing military tactics simulations with us as part of the history degree coursework. And he was trying to explain how this wicker armor would work and why it was effective. And so he brought in some wicker, like, I don't know, from a lawn chair or something. It wasn't that impressive. It certainly wasn't armor. He demonstrated how it was very effective at deflecting a blow or two, even a projectile, and especially if it were treated or even thicker and designed to obstruct that. It worked really well against the weapons of war in the 5th century BC. Now, okay, in fairness, that armor didn't work out so well in the campaign against the Greeks because the Persians lost, but it wasn't the armor's fault. When Xerxes went and lost to the Athenians and Themistocles a generation earlier than what we're looking at here in Nehemiah, I mean, it was bad command decisions' fault, and their ultimate defeat It was really a naval battle. So you can't put it on the armor. It would make sense that Nehemiah and his retinue would have traveled in that Persian wicker-style armor that the immortals were known to wear. That was an elite fighting unit dedicated to the king and the people who were immediately in proximity to the king. It's also possible that they were wearing more of a Levantine ancient Near Eastern armor that, let me see, at this time, it would have been bronze, maybe iron, and that would have been heavier and clunkier. It wouldn't have covered the whole body. Don't think knight in shining armor. Think more like covering a few vitals, maybe the shoulders. But I don't know. I would think that the armor of the day would have been that Persian style armor. Okay, whatever the case, it's unwieldy, it's heavy, and as soon as you go from there are people with bows and spears and swords up to bows and spears and swords and armor, okay, what you've done then effectively at that point is you've made it impossible for those people to just set down their weapon, pick up a trowel, knock out a little bit of stonework, and then quick pick up a spear again if somebody gets too close that looks dangerous. No, at this point, you have created a professional army, a full-time division of the total manpower you have to work with, and you've created a workforce division. You can tell them apart because one's wearing armor and one is not. Nehemiah's got a strategic conundrum here because he's trying to cover a whole lot of wall, but he doesn't have a whole lot of people to do it. Now, I don't know that we ever figured out exactly what the dimensions were on this thing. Let me thumb back this direction a little bit. There's a cool diagram. All right, this is making it look like it might have been about 2 miles, 11,000 feet of wall total. So they got to cover that. Well, how many dudes does it take to cover 2 miles worth of line and not let people through? I mean, think about this. If Sanballat and his ilk break through at any weak point, they're now in the backfield going at the backside of all of the workers. The soldiers are on the wrong side of the fight now. Basically, Sanballat at that point would be in your base killing your dudes. It's a serious, serious problem because where do you put your guys to defend all of that range? Well, obviously you go to the parts of the wall that are weakest and most vulnerable. But even then, Sanballat has a strategic advantage here because he can move all of his troops around, especially under cover of darkness. And if he can do that without the defenders seeing where he's attacking from, and he can get into that attack quickly, he has a chance to break through, get inside the walls, and then everything's over. It's going to be a complete and total rout. But on the other hand, Nehemiah has the advantage because if they can detect where Sanballat's attack is coming from, then they can quickly rally a bunch of troops from places that don't need to be guarded at the moment. They can cover that breach and hold him off. Internal movement in a defensive line is easier than external movement. That's why when you look at battle maps, the defensive formation will always be concave. That is, there'll be a little bit of room in between the two ends of the defensive line. It'll be kind of curved, even like a horseshoe a little bit, because it's really fast to go from one end of the defensive line to anywhere else in the defensive line when the thing is a half circle. Much easier than if it's 2 miles spread all the way out. But you got to have a system to let people know so that you can quickly move troops inside the walls to hold off any potential attack. And it would be weird to me if there was no account of what the plan was for that in Nehemiah, but there is an account of what the plan was for that right here, where it says the officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. That is not convenient. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. So you could rally Anybody could drop the trowel and go to the sword. Obviously, your armored tanks are going to be more effective, but anybody could fight and move interior to the walls. But how are they going to know? That question still lingers. Here we go, verse 18. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Brilliant. So we got a beacon system. We got a warning alarm system. Nehemiah's job is basically to patrol around, know where all of the vulnerable spots are. He no doubt had an alert system and sentries stationed about so that through a series of blasts on the trumpet, remember, this is a 2-mile range. That is big. But through a series of blasts on the trumpet, people could quickly rally and reorganize to a vulnerable spot. Now, Sanballat's going to figure this out. I mean, there's no hiding it. He's going to be able to see what the defensive strategy is, And he's going to be discouraged from attacking because it is a very good defensive strategy. It is the correct defensive strategy. This is the defensive strategy that allowed the Union to barely hold the line at the Battle of Gettysburg. They took a defensive position and just curled the edges so they could maintain lines of communication, so they could reallocate troops to vulnerable positions, and so that they could have faster movement behind the lines than the Confederacy could have on the wide side of the lines. So this is a timeless strategy. It's making a ton of sense. Nehemiah goes on here in verse 19, talking about his strategy. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued the work, with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. At that time I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they can serve us as guards by night and workmen by day. Neither I, nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when we went for water. Simply put, these guys are on all the time. You know what it is to be in a high-pressure situation, even just a social situation where you can't really relax or ever let your guard down. You got to be sharp. You got to be on. It's exhausting. And these guys are fixing to do this for a period of several weeks, if need be. And it's not just a social threat. It's literally the threat of we could be attacked and killed at any given moment. Everybody stay ready. Everybody keep your sword within reach. And somehow in here, the only way out, the only way to get past this very miserable, difficult time, the only way out is through. We got to build the wall. We got to build the wall. We got to build the wall. When the wall is done, this very difficult time ends, but we're going to have a tough time getting there, and it's going to require some extraordinary measures and some extraordinary sacrifices and some extraordinary endurance on the part of everybody, from Nehemiah at the top all the way down to the perfume maker's daughter who is helping with her little segment of the wall. This is an all-in effort, and it's very demanding, and it's very tiresome. But this is what it takes to beat an enemy when you really aren't in a great defensive position. You've got a ton of vulnerabilities, and the clock is ticking. I keep telling you I'm a big fan of Nehemiah because I'm a big fan of Nehemiah. I like his leadership. He does things that make sense. He's practically minded, but he also understands that the people he's working with are people. They're humans, and he's like a dad to them, a grandfather to them. He's always nurturing them and encouraging them, and he's cognizant of what it would be like to be them. He's a good leader, and I'm having fun looking at this and trying to think about how I can take cues from how he does it as we chew through this thing together. All right, that's plenty for today. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.